This is a ManeHustle Media Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the show. My name is Jackie O and you're listening to Militantly Mixed.
Yo, this is Rashani from the Single Simulcast. And when I'm not making you laugh or making up parody songs, I'm kicking back, listening to Militantly Mixed.
I would like to acknowledge that the Militantly Mixed podcast is recorded on the traditional lands of the Chumash and the Tongva people, and I wish to pay my respects to the people of those nations, both past and present. Hey y'all, welcome to Militantly Mixed, the podcast about race and identity from the mixed race perspective. I am your host, Charmaine, aka Mixed Girl Maine, the busiest mixed race, bisexual, polyamorous, atheist, comic book nerd, cat mom, mask making, Gulf Coast Cosmos, comic book co-owning, Asian American Podcasters Association's Golden Crane Award winning podcaster in this podcasting game. This is episode 129, and I can definitely say with complete honesty that making the decision to take a 6-month hiatus from Blurred Comics and go to a bi-weekly schedule for Militantly Mixed has been a tremendous relief. I was bummed out when I made the decision, and I realize now that I have just put a self-imposed burden to achieve a certain level of functionality across all the things that I'm doing, my day job, my companies, the podcasting, all that kind of stuff, and expecting that I'm supposed to perform at some sort of superhuman level that really just isn't reasonable for anybody. But like I said, it's self-imposed. I did it to myself and I was stressing out. But ever since I made the decision, well, let's say a couple days after I made the decision, when I realized I had a little bit of a breather, I've still been really busy, but at a more doable, attainable level, it has been a relief. So I do think this was the right decision. And I am a whole different Charmaine today than I was even a week ago in terms of my level of stress. So I hope you all will be okay with this bi-weekly schedule for a little while, but it has been a tremendous help to have that little bit of a breather. You know, it just really has. I'm just in a way better mental health space today than I was even a week ago in making this decision. So it really worked out for me. A couple announcements before we get into today's episode. I'm really excited about today's episode. This is an interview I did back in January, and I've been dreaming about sharing it ever since we recorded it because it was so therapeutic. But before we do that, I have a couple announcements. The first one is that I'm going to be a guest, or I was a guest, on a new podcast called Willing to Learn, hosted by Ashley Dominguez. She is a research scholar, and she is doing a weekly podcast that has to do with sort of learning or unlearning, quote unquote, truths about different areas. And each week she'll have a different guest that is sort of known for something, and us talking about the myths or the untruths related to that thing, the stereotypes, and sort of unlearning those things and learning what actually would work out. So obviously I talked about Mixedness. I am going to be the second guest on her show, and I believe it's on all the podcatchers. I was able to listen to her first episode on iTunes. So you can check it out, Willing to Learn, hosted by Ashley Dominguez. And I believe my episode drops on March 10th. So check that out. And then I started highlighting different content creators for Mixedness because I want y'all to know that there are many other places to get your mixed ass life outside of Militantly Mixed. These are not advertisements. I just want to highlight that. I'm not being paid to do this, nor do these people necessarily know that I'm highlighting them unless they listen to the show. But these are folks, right now, they're folks that I have interacted with because I know their stuff more. Over time, when I run out of people that I've interacted with, I'll start highlighting other mixed things that I'm looking for and looking up. But for now, these are all people that I've interacted with in some way, shape, or form in Mixedness, and I want to share their content or their products or whatever. This one is Mixed Up Clothing, who you first heard about on Militantly Mixed back in 2018 from episode 8, when I still didn't even have my Militantly Mixed voice yet. Founded by Sonia Smith-Kang, Mixed Up Clothing, this is the mission, is more than creating gorgeous multicultural children's apparel. We're dedicated to sharing the vibrant cultures of the world and creating a space where multiculturalism is highlighted and diversity is celebrated. So predominantly it is a children's apparel line, but they do have some t-shirts for adults. And she also has medical face masks, which is sort of what inspired me to start making my masks, I'll be honest. She's also the president of MASC, MASC, which technically stands for Multiracial Americans of Southern California, but has since grown to be just sort of MASC across the board. It is a organization for mixed race families. Before COVID, they were doing a lot of events out in the world for mixed race families, including multiracial Santa Claus for Christmas time, or various cultural holidays for various ethnic groups. They would celebrate in sort of a mixed fashion. MASC was also responsible, or a big part of the reason why we have the 2 or more box now instead of check 1 only for ethnicity and race. They did a lot of work for that of like 10, 20 years ago, I think. And they were also responsible for getting us a mixed day, affinity day at Dodger Stadium. So check out Mixed Up Clothing. The link is in the show notes, but it is just mixedupclothing.com. Sonia is one of those go-to mix folks that I reach out to when I need to bounce ideas off of. So I am super excited to be able to share her company because I think it's dope and I want y'all to check it out, and hopefully you can dress up your little mixed kiddos in some cool mixed up gear. Is that all the stuff I need to talk about? I think so. Let's get into today's episode. You already know that this is a fan-sponsored show, and with Patreon, that's how we keep it going. The link to that is in the show notes. I'm not going to give you the pitch for it today because I want to get into today's episode. I've been thinking about this episode ever since we recorded back in January. And it's just one of those that was kind of really super therapeutic. A lot of the episodes are like that, but every now and then it's when someone's kind of mixed closer to your mix, or there's something very significant that you both experience, those ones become super therapeutic. And that's kind of how this one was. My guest today is Tai Fujimura. He is a CEO of his own web design company called Cantilever, but he also is a podcast host of a soccer-based show called We The Peeps, which he co-hosts with his brother Clayton. They mostly cover U.S. men's soccer, but also sometimes U.S. women's soccer or general soccer podcasts. We got to commiserate a little bit about podcasting and sort of what we hope and dream to be able to turn this into our full time, but we have very niche podcasts, so we got to commiserate about that a little bit. We got to commiserate about hair spikiness as fellow mixed Japanese. And there's at least one thing I need to correct that we talked about in the show that I was completely wrong about when we recorded it. And I had to since look it up just to make sure of what it was. At one point I bring up the basketball player Ryu Hachimura, who is Black and Japanese from Japan, was drafted, the very first person drafted from Japan into the NBA. And for some reason, I thought he was drafted onto the Lakers, but he's actually on the Wizards. So that's what I say incorrectly. I say that he's in the Lakers. And I realize now that the reason why I thought that is because he was in LA going to a restaurant down the street from my house. And a bunch of people in this Japanese American group social group I'm in, were talking about it. And so I guess I thought he was here in LA because he had just gotten drafted into the Lakers, but I was incorrect about that. So I just want to correct that because I don't correct it in the show. I have wrong information in the actual recording. But this was a great episode. We really got to talk. I got to see a different perspective of what it's like to be a mixed Japanese who gets to sit fairly comfortably in both his Japanese identity and his white identity. He's a father and he's raising a couple of mixed kids himself. So we got to talk about a lot of things, and it was just a really great conversation. I don't know what to say about it. I really enjoyed it, and I can't wait to share it with y'all. So sit back, enjoy this week's episode, and the next time you'll hear from me will be March 23rd. And by that time, I should be fully vaccinated because my number 2 shot is on the 18th. So I can give you all an update then on how I'm feeling and how I weathered the second dose. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming our latest Itoko to the Militantly Mixed family. Itoko is cousin in Japanese. Tai Fujimura. first of all, thank you for postponing, because I had that crazy ass period of 2 weeks that everything fell apart for me.
Not a problem.
Coming to rescheduling me, but I'm excited to get a chance to talk to you because we met in a way that is weird. We were on an award show together. We were both mixed Asians, so we were like, hey. Let's do this.
It's a very 2020 way to meet someone. I guess, was that 2021 or it was around the new year?
It was around, it was right after Christmas, right before the New Year's.
Yeah. And you mentioned that you're half Japanese and I'm half Japanese as well. Yep. And so, naturally we get to talking. And it's a pleasure to connect. So I would you like me to introduce myself briefly? So
introduce yourself and let's get into it.
I'm Tai Fujimura. I am, as I mentioned, half Japanese and half white American person, human being. I am most importantly a dad. I have 2 kids. They're ages 6 and 9. They're both in virtual school. So consequently, I now have a job as a virtual school assistant teacher. Which is about half my day right now. And in my spare time, I'm the CEO of a web design company, which is called Cantilever. And we work with all sorts of companies to build great websites for them and help them do more of whatever they're trying to do on the web. And I also host a podcast, which is why I was at this award ceremony, which is called We The Peeps. And we are primarily about the U.S. men's national soccer team. We also have a long-running segment where we cover the women's national team as well. And we have interviews. We do game previews and recaps. We've been going for about 6 years, coming up on 6 years, I think. And it's been just a tremendous experience. I always kind of thought of being a sports journalist, but it's kind of a tough way to make a living. Right. So I just kind of get to pretend that I'm, doing my dream job when I hit the mic. And
that's
I've gotten to go to games and all that stuff.
Right? You just get to be an expert all of a sudden about something because you press record.
Well, what's funny about it is we started the show with the conceit. I do it with my brother. My brother's he's also a musician. And so he's great with audio editing. Awesome. And so, by the way, if you need a podcast editor, we'll connect.
As soon as I get those ducats, I'm going to start. Absolutely.
Yep. So anyway, we do the show. And originally the conceit was that I've been a longtime fan. So I've been a fan for, a decade or more of the U.S. men's team. And my brother was just kind of getting into it. So originally it was this will be fun. I'll kind of talk you through stuff. You can speak to it from an outsider perspective. And then 160 episodes later, now he is a total expert and he knows he knows all the, U15 standouts and all this stuff. And so you do actually become an expert. You kind of fake it till you make it.
Right.
It's been just so fun, so fulfilling. It's, I've never made a dime off it. And I wouldn't give it up for the world. So even in COVID, we were doing shows, we would watch old games because there's these repositories you can find with the old grainy VHS footage of the, we watched the 1994 World Cup and stuff like that. And talked about those games, so we had this urge to do it even when there were no actual games to talk about.
Right.
That's how much it's become a part of our lives and something that we, really, really enjoy. And it gives us a great opportunity to, just catch up. We're always, we're busy. So it's good to have that excuse. We end up on the phone frequently and just able to, shoot the shit. And it's opened up a lot of opportunities to talk to really cool people. Mm-hmm. So I'm sure you've had this feeling as well. It opens doors and it's been a really special experience. So I love it.
I really feel I stole this from one of my guests, but they referred to them writing about their mixed race identity as medicine, doing this work as medicine. And I feel like the show has become medicine to me because I do take a mental health break every 3 months. I work for 3 months and then I take a month off
That's right. I remember. Yeah.
Absorbing those stories, but I miss it during that time. I feel like I need it. I need to come back to it, but I need to take that break also. But doing this and getting a chance to speak to people like us, mixed folks from all over, it has become this thing of this is a thing I need. I don't know what life's going to be like if podcasts stop being a thing? You know, am I just going to randomly go on the internet and call up people and be like, can you tell me about your mixedness? Like I'm going to need something if this goes away. So yeah.
Right.
I would love to make money doing this, but for now, like, you know, a couple of little,
that's going to happen.
Like one day it's fine.
It's a lot of work, you know, it's a lot of, equity building.
Mm-hmm. And we were talking earlier before we press record about sort of like how difficult it is to get that neat. Like you see people get on TikTok or on YouTube and they just blow what we perceive as they just blow up. But right. And we're just like, you know, we're not quite there yet. But for me, I noticed, you know, you've been doing your show for 6 years. For me, it's the 1 year mark. I suddenly had a big jump, and then I leveled out. And then at the 2.5 year mark, all of a sudden I had like a huge jump, and I'm like, where the hell have you guys been? And, you know, now I'm having a little bit more steady growth, but even that, like, it's not like I'm pulling Rogan numbers or anything like that. I'm very talking to a very niche population, but it's tough. Like it's a weird grind. It's a grind I love to do, but it's a weird one.
Right. Well, it is a niche, but it is a very rapidly growing niche, and it's, I think, a big sort of artifact of our time is the emergence of mixedness as a thing, because I think we've been a lot more of an anomaly previously, prior to like air travel and the ability for people to immigrate a little bit more easily.
Right.
The presence of mixedness as a category is unique and I think challenging to people in the establishment and challenging on government forums sometimes and things like that, where like the thing you are isn't really a choice.
Or like you identify with an ethnic group, but they say race, and you're like, I know this isn't a race. They're gonna make me click
There's
this accurately.
Yeah. There's a lot of you know, nuances like that don't come through the generalized mainstream. Like, you know, I think there's been a lot of very good movement lately in like adding more options to that gender drop down. You know, which is a positive. And I think there is now similar movement when it comes to recognizing the plethora of different backgrounds that we all have, and, you know, helping everyone feel accepted.
So growing up, what did you understand about the fact that your parents were two different things and you were what you were?
Oh, I don't know. It's very interesting. I grew up in New York. So I was in New York City most of my upbringing, and I never really felt othered for being mixed.
Yeah, you're in New York. Yeah.
Yeah, I was reflecting on this quite a bit because I was listening to your show and, you know, preparing to talk to you, and I was thinking that's probably unique, right? Because
I think it is.
Because of the circumstances, and so I feel lucky, you know, in retrospect. I always felt like it was sort of an abundance rather than a shortcoming.
I love that you said that.
You know what I mean?
I don't hear that often, and it makes me so happy when people think like mixed isn't less, it's more, or could be.
That's right.
More.
That's right. That's
said that.
Yeah, and I think it was cool having, you know, very different family on both sides and having very different cultural experiences and access to a lot of different things. So, and I always, I think I always felt accepted to an extent in the most Asian spaces, which in New York generally centers around Chinese people in Chinatown. And I had a lot of Chinese friends, and I spent a lot of time literally in Chinatown hanging out. And I always felt okay. You know, I never felt like I was considered anything but Asian. But so I also
Asian versus Japanese, like
Asian versus Japanese, which is right. And to briefly dig in on that, it took me until I was like, you know, high school and college age to realize that actually being Japanese is in and of itself is a little bit of an aggression when it comes to Chinese people and Korean people and other Asian folks who have experienced a lot of shitty behavior and treatment by the hands of the Japanese. So I look back on that and it's that really amazes me that, I'm a student of history, and I think I watch and read a lot about World War II and mm-hmm. events like that, and thinking that within 2 generations, you have the children. I'm mixed, so right, I represent both sides of World War II,
right,
and I'm hanging out with Chinese kids and Korean kids and Black kids and Puerto Rican kids. It's kind of mind-boggling that it all kind of
pretty wild
worked, and that like there's always awkwardness, and there's always moments where you notice, right? But there's, after a certain amount of time, it fades away, and that's a really beautiful thing when you can get to that point.
So you didn't really deal with too much like on the schoolyard of people's like, you're not Asian, you're not white, you didn't get that too often?
I can't say. I think the most kind of like crappy comments that I got were just about being Asian. Okay. It wasn't. So I think I was generally recognized as being Asian.
Right.
But I was always very like fluent in white spaces.
That's a good way of saying it.
Very, very able to navigate.
Sure.
Right. So I've been in a lot of situations where I notice like, oh, I'm the only person of color in this room. I'm the only person of color in this conversation, whatever it is. And that never really felt weird to me until I noticed it, because I think I adapt very well to, mainstream white culture, from which just makes sense.
Yeah. A lot of us.
So So, I've gotten the occasional like ignorant comment about Japanese people or Asian people, especially because I identified very strongly as Asian in high school. So I very much like leaned into my Asian identity, and really, really like explored that, felt that, I was in the Asian club and all this stuff. And that was very valuable, very important and meaningful for me. But yeah, what was the original question? What was my experience?
Well, it was really about just sort of, because you mentioned listening to other episodes and also thinking about where you grew up, how you do, you have a little bit more just like ease in your mixes because you're around a bunch of people that might be mixed or just might be from different, ethnic groups.
Right.
Like
right.
A lot of people who are just not in this diverse of a space.
Completely. Yeah.
They really, really struggle. But when you either get to blend in all the way in whatever it is that you identify with the most, or you get to be mixed because you got a whole bunch of different people around you. I was just curious, I guess, about like how. Well, I mean, you answered it. You said, you mostly identified as Asian in high school, so that allowed you to maneuver that way. And so you were probably getting any schoolyard bullying you're getting is Asian, not mixed or not.
Exactly.
You're not enough of, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
One funny thing there is, I think I never got much of it, as I said, but my mom, being a white lady with a bunch of Asian kids, got comments. I know which she has told me.
She adopted you all? Or?
Yes, okay. Precisely. So
it's so weird that I could just pull that out.
You just nailed it. Yeah, you just you just
seems to happen a lot.
Picked out what ignorant people would say. So I feel like she, being fully Caucasian in an Asian family, probably felt it the most.
Yeah.
Probably felt the mixedness of our family the most, especially, I was born in Japan. So she lived in Japan for a long time, when we were there. And, in Japan, white people stick out like a sore thumb. Yeah. It's an incredibly homogenous culture. It's amazing. It's amazing. Especially like coming from a place like New York that's so pluralistic. I love Japan. I've been back twice. I haven't been since I was a high schooler. But it's an incredible place filled with really amazing art and culture and food and oh my God, so like technology, and yet it's one of the most homogenous places on the planet. It's an island, where fitting in is one of the main cultural values, So I think that aspect of living there was probably a big challenge for her. But
it might also be why you're able to assimilate to whatever group you're in fairly well. Like if you happen to be around a lot of white people, I'm gonna be fluent in white right now or something, because you were trained in the culture that tells you not to stick out.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And I have, I was only there for 4 years, until I was age 4. And my community there was mainly a church-based community that was American centric.
Okay.
So I did spend time with Japanese kids, but I also had something of an American heritage in that sense as well. However, I always still notice these things about being Japanese that just come up in me about my mentality and my attitude towards duty and towards doing the right thing. And, it's tough for me to explain them in any other way,
except for to someone who's just going to go, yep.
Yeah.
Because I get instantly deferential if I'm around like older Japanese even just generally older Asians, because I kind of go into my Japanese behaviors when I'm around other Asians too. Things that I don't do around older white people.
Interesting.
It's strange.
Yeah, it's such a difficult formula to break down to understand the sort of origin of your reactions to situations. But I think, I don't know, that's part of the fun of being mixed, is figuring all that out. And it everybody does, right? So, but we just have a particular blueprint that hasn't necessarily been fleshed out yet by that many people, which is kind of a cool opportunity.
So is your father a Nihonjin, or is he like American born but went over there because military? What is the circumstance that has your parents?
So yeah, he has a very interesting story because he was actually born in the U.S. His father was a scientist. He's a linguist. Okay. So his father and their family traveled around quite a bit when he was young. So his father was teaching in MIT at the time. And so he was born in Boston. And then his family moved around. They lived in Sweden, among, I think, a handful of other places before eventually going back to Japan. And my father didn't come back to the US until he was in high school. Okay. So my father basically spent, a year or two here, spent most of elementary school in Japan, and then spent most of high school in the US. Oh, so I was born in Japan. Because my parents, so my parents met in college in the US, and then they moved back to Japan because my father got a scholarship to the National Art School there. Okay. And he's a painter. And so they went to take the scholarship. And so I was born there. So I'm the immigrant. My father was born here. So he's technically first generation. And then I don't know how that works. So
like trying to map that out, given that it is so important to us as a community to feel like what kind of Japanese
exactly
It's such a weird thing that we ask.
That's right. And I remember, actually, I had never thought about this until this very moment, but there was another Japanese student in middle school. It was a classmate of mine, and she did a class project about the different names for different generations of Japanese, Nisei, Issei, and so on. Mm-hmm. And I remember looking at it and going like, I'm not any of those. Like, I don't know what I am.
You're kind of Issei, but kind of not, because your parents...
I was born there.
You're born there. So
yeah. So I have like a second generation mentality.
Yes.
But I wasn't born here.
I need to talk way more about this, but I need to process this. It's so crazy. So one of the things that happens when I do get a chance to speak to other mixed Japanese is also asking the question, what kind of Japanese? Because for us that are here in America, are we American internment, post-internment Japanese?
Right,
or
right.
Are we,
of course.
Immigrants?
Yes.
And in my case, my family is, my grandmother immigrated here. She married an American and came here. And in your case, wow. Okay. So your father's parents are Japanese from Japan, though.
Yes, that's right. Going back hundreds of years in their history.
Crazy. That's interesting. So, I would love to figure out what name they would come up for.
Yeah, that's right.
In your position.
That's right.
That's kind of awesome.
It's interesting you mentioned the internment camps, because obviously that's a very, very powerful aspect of Japanese American history, but I feel disconnected from it.
So do I.
Because my ancestors weren't really directly affected. But that makes me feel odd because obviously I feel very sympathetic, and I claim their Japaneseness, and I share their Japaneseness. And so I feel a kinship with them in that experience. But then I start to feel kind of phony because I don't really come from that. So, man, it's so complicated.
Is.
But
I think in particular, like, I think other Asians that have emigrated to the States and are generationally here, they don't have anything quite like what we have as Japanese, because not only do we have different waves of immigration, right? We have because we were here during the railroads too. It wasn't entirely Chinese, but Gold Rush Japanese.
Totally.
Japanese got to be white earlier.
Didn't know that.
White for a while.
Nice. All right.
So they actually kind of come here white. And then when they started to not like the Chinese being here too much, because they're like, oh, you kind of look like them to us. So now you get to be this other category.
Now we have a category for
right.
you.
And so up until then, Japanese could be a lot more successful here in the United States before that level of racism that was connected to Chinese. And then, we have generational Japanese here in the States, and then we have internment. And anybody like us whose family comes after, we bear some of the systemic things that are left over from the internment generations, but we don't connect ourselves to that. And also, like, my grandmother, I went to this internment acknowledgement thing when I was like 19. And I bought this book, and, I was just trying to support the tribe, right? And I come home and I show my grandma the thing because she didn't want to go with me. And I just thought, oh, she's World War II generation. Of course she wouldn't want to go, right? I'm thinking about reliving trauma is the reason why she didn't want to go. After I'm showing her the book, she goes, why did you buy this? And I was like, well, I wanted to support and share and stuff. And she goes, but they're not like us. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? I didn't understand. And it took years to understand this. Japanese in Japan are Japanese. Japanese that leave Japan are wherever they go to. They're not Japanese anymore because of the nationalistic thing. And so my grandmother viewed herself as an American because she immigrated to America. She left Japan behind, but she had this weird posturing about, like, they left long before, so they were really not Japanese.
Right.
Like she's still kind of Japanese because she grew up there, but they aren't like me at all. So she couldn't relate to them, but also it almost seemed like she couldn't extend empathy to that kind of Japanese, which was so bizarre to me because I didn't understand the concept of, like, that nationalistic version of Japaneseness versus, like, cultural and ethnic Japanese.
Right.
So then you and I come here, whatever generation position we're in, when we interact with other Japanese, we do need to understand, because that helps us decide how we have conversations as Japanese.
That's right.
If you're post-internment, or if you're an immigrant, or you're this descendant of immigrants, this is how we have to talk to you now.
Yes.
And it's so unique, I think, specifically to Japanese.
Right. Yeah, I think you're right. I think, it's probably a consequence of Japanese society being so homogenous that every society finds ways to differentiate and to classify and to make some people better and some people worse. And often it's imperceptible to the outside world why there would be these distinctions in the society, but people find a way. It seems to be kind of a human instinct, which is nasty, and needs to be, dealt with, but should also be acknowledged, if that's something that we're going to face. And I think, when I visited Japan, I know we get looks. I know we're definitely not, embraced just as, normal Japanese folks. And we don't speak the language, my siblings and I as well. So, we always have felt very, very spiritually kind of connected, but disconnected in sort of pragmatic ways.
Yeah. That's the whole thing.
And it's a whole thing. I wanted to mention to you, that I saw, because I was reflecting on all my, mixed race experiences, and I have this dream that comes up for me regularly, where I am trying to get to the airport. I'm always going to Japan, and something is always happening that's just preventing me from getting to the airport. So I will like pack my bag, and then I'm waiting for the train, and the train doesn't come, and I'm looking at my watch. I've got like an hour until my flight, or like I get like almost there and I realize like, oh, I don't have my phone, or I don't have my passport, or I forgot my luggage, or like any number of these wacky circumstances where like I'm within sight. Like I've gotten to the point even where I'm like in the tunnel watching the plane, drift off onto the runway. And I was listening to your show. I'm sorry, I forgot the guest's name, but you were talking about mourning the loss of your identity, of your racial identity.
That was probably Sidra.
Yeah. And that was a really beautiful statement. I realized like that's what I've been going through there, is trying to reconcile the feeling of belonging somewhere yet not being an insider there.
Yeah. It hurt. It's a weird, like, it seems one of those things that you want to say it's not that big a deal. Like you want to think of it as not that big a deal, but it feels heavy. It feels similar to grief. To me. Right.
And I think that that word grief is much more universally applicable than people give it credit for. And I've had experiences in my life where I have been told, it's been illuminated to me through therapy that I'm going through a grieving process. And that's a very powerful thing when you isolate, I've always isolated that to death, but there are many different kinds of ending, things ending, or things, never going to be quite resolved, maybe the way that you would like. And that process of grief can map directly to those things. So I think that's a very apt word, and something that, mixed people who are struggling with their identity might want to think about is if they've been in that kind of grieving process, and maybe that can illuminate some things that help light the way. But my stages of grief, eventually in my stages of this grief, I've come to a place. Actually, it's not that linear. It's more accurate to say I have always consciously or subconsciously reacted to the mystery of mixedness by leaning very, very hard into being American. And
really?
So for me, America has always represented, maybe because I grew up in New York, but it's always represented a place where mixedness can flourish, right? Okay. So, and not just mixedness, but anything that in theory, this is a place where everyone can be accepted and uplifted and can reach their potential. And we know very well that that's not true in practice. And there are deep flaws in our system. But I still believe so deeply in the idea of America, despite everything, despite all the shit.
The ideal of it, not necessarily the
in the potential future of it. And so I have always felt extremely patriotic about America. And that's one reason why I do this podcast that's about the US men's national team, because it's a way to celebrate Americanism in a form that is substantially less toxic than most of the Americanism that we inflict on others.
Olympics. What happens during the Olympics? How does mixed Thai celebrate the Olympics?
Well, I'm very much America first.
Okay.
I'm a big anytime the US is in a sporting circumstance, I'm in. And I always do pay attention to Japanese athletes as well.
Okay.
And in the World Cup, certainly when the US is out, the Japan team is my team. In the last World Cup, actually, the US team didn't even qualify. Okay. So my brother and we talked about this on our show, but we had the really unique experience of following the Japanese team as our first team during the World Cup, and really like getting to know it, and eventually getting angry at all of the mistakes that they made in the last game and things like that. So we became some more of Japan fans at that point, which was really cool. But And then another aspect with athletics is that I'm a big sports fan in general. So whenever there's a Japanese athlete in particular or an Asian athlete in general doing well in American sports, that's really meaningful to me and exciting in an irrational way. Like
even for sports I don't watch, if I find out, like right now there's, and I forget his name, I'm so mad at myself, but there's a half black, half Japanese from Japan player on the Lakers.
Oh, Hachimura? Is it?
Yes, that's
it. He went to the Lakers? Like, oh, wow.
I think
breaking news.
maybe he's not anymore. Okay. But I think there was a period of time he was here. Like, and I'm in this Japanese American group, like social group. And that was where the first time I started seeing like older Japanese saying, he's tall, I'll allow him to marry my daughter, even though he's black, even though Kokojin. And I was like, whoa, like this is where I started to feel really weird about the group I was in, because the height trumps the ethnicity for them. And it was this weird thing of like, because he's tall and he's here in LA, I'll let him marry my daughter.
Right. Yeah. Blackness is bad, but we have these other good qualities that we can balance it out. Yeah.
And
that's
it was
fucked
so
up.
weird. But because I found out that there was a black and Japanese player, I got excited because I'm a black and Japanese. So I was just like, oh, yay. I don't watch basketball. I haven't watched basketball in a long time. So,
but representation matters.
It does.
You know, and hey, we have a black and Asian person who's the vice president of the United States right now.
Exactly.
Which is insane. And that really is going to mean something to a lot of people, you know, and I think it's profoundly good. I know that like professional athletics is not necessarily the zenith of society and what we should all aim to aspire to, but like,
can't help but be
I do see it as a symptom of a certain amount of discrimination. That there are not more Asian athletes who reach the top level of American sports. Sure. And I think that primarily the reason for that is that at the youth team levels, when you're going through the ranks, the coaches are primed to look for certain stereotypes of who's going to be successful. So when you're picking, you know, kids for the middle school basketball team and who's going to get the minutes and who's going to start, you're going to pick the taller black kids. Yeah.
But to be fair, a Japanese man was the first to integrate the NBA.
Right. Exactly.
So like they could have remembered.
Yeah. But that's what I mean is like, I think the stories of these people who break these boundaries will help to fight those stereotypes and make it so that the infrastructure is a little bit more neutral or willing to at least see how you play. Right. And let your results speak for themselves, rather than just judging based on what the stereotype would be. So I think, it's progress. I do feel like there's a movement. There's a little bit of a movement, starting with Jeremy Lin and others. And now you have a number of athletes doing well.
We at least have baseball. Japanese can claim as much space as the Dominicans. Well, maybe not entirely here in the United States, but in terms of immigrants who come to America to play baseball, Dominicans and Japanese.
The Japanese have represented very well as baseball imports, and that was a huge point of pride for me. You know, growing up, I was a big baseball fan, and still to this day, I was literally just like Googling the stats of Shohei Ohtani is one of my favorites because I'm really not that involved in the sport anymore, but like just to check how he's doing and just to send some good vibes. And it just, I don't know. I guess it's irrational, but it's also just, it's fun. And it helps me feel like there's, progress being made towards something that I want. I
will say, kind of jumping off of what you said about patriotism, like my connection to Americanness only happens when I'm not in America. It's a very weird thing because I look the way that I look, I don't find myself often in places where people think like, oh, you must be an American. I often get asked if I speak English, which is weird because I don't look super duper foreign, in general. Like
you get asked if you speak English here?
I've been asked if I speak English here. But I mostly get asked if I speak Spanish, which is like, okay, fine. When my hair is different, and we're going to talk about hair too.
Yes.
When my hair is longer and curlier, I get asked if I speak Spanish more often, or people just speak Spanish to me.
Yes.
Things like that. But when I'm in England or if I'm in Canada or something like that, the oh, you're American and all these assumptions, like then it's the time where I'm like, oh, no, that's not all the Americans. Like I find myself in other countries having to say that stereotype you're talking about, that's only the white ones. Or, like something that really broad and terrible to say because they don't have the same thing that we have here in the States. Like even in the UK where, well, let's specifically like bring it down. Even in London is an extremely diverse place. Of
course.
But if I walk up as an American and I'm next to my British cousin who's fully white, fully British, and we say we're cousins and they don't understand how that's humanly possible. They're like, but you're American, right? And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, so you, and then it's just fill in the blank of all these weird American stereotypes that I didn't even realize other countries had about us. And then I would try to say, no, that's mostly like the white population or the rich white population or the poor white population or, stuff like that. Or, and I would see these things of just like, even in the UK, they were like, but you're all the same, right? Like we're all the same. You're all the same, right?
Right,
it's not something that you can really easily explain because it's a different kind of homogeneity over there. It's still very homogenous, but they have pockets of like almost forced diversity that they're not.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. If you drive
spread.
Right. If you drive 100 miles out of London, you're going to see almost all white people.
Yeah. And if you are a brown mixed UK, person living anywhere in the UK, everybody will know. Like everybody will know. I've had guests on the show who live in like small towns in Wales or small towns in Scotland. And they're like, oh, I know so-and-so. That's the black one. And it'll just be that they're mixed.
Right.
But they know who their grandmother is or they know who their mother is, but they're just the black guy from the village. Literally, that's how it is. So they don't have what we have here. Because even in our rural places, we might have some differences.
Yeah. Well, what I love about the idea of this is that if you are asked to picture what an American looks like, good luck.
Right.
There is no what an American looks like because even white people aren't the majority here anymore.
But they believe that they are.
Or they might, might not like that they are. And so I see this a lot with the soccer team because when our soccer team plays against, let's say, Ghana, the difference in the amount of diversity on each team is incredibly stark.
Right. Okay.
And that's not that that's a bad thing.
But Ghana, they're most likely going to be entirely black and brown people.
Yes, exactly. Or if we play against Iceland, same deal. Or if we play against China, same deal. There's really only like a handful of teams that have anything close to the amount of diversity that we do, where on any given lineup, we've got, a Japanese player, 3 Latin American players, several black players, a couple white players. And we've had even going into like different faiths, we have Muslims, Christians, and Jews.
Right.
We've had there was one gay player actually who played substantial minutes for the national team, who later came out, and his name is Robbie Rogers, and he's a really amazing, groundbreaking person. So the team has always kind of forced, I think, the sports public to acknowledge the diversity of American society, because it is, in the best of circumstances, it's a meritocracy, and you see that in a true meritocracy, we produce mixed groups. That the very top level of this sport here is a mixed group, and that's very powerful and meaningful to me, and something that I always carry a lot of pride about when I watch our teams play on TV.
That's cool. It's interesting to see it from a sports perspective because I don't watch a lot of.
Well, what's amazing about it is that it's a way to bridge cultures. It's something that allows you to, I in my job, I work with a fair amount of people internationally, and it's one of the first questions I always ask is, what's your soccer game. What's your team? What are you into? Because, more often than not, people have something that they're passionate about. Mm-hmm. And I'm, because I'm a longtime fan, I can talk to you about soccer in any country pretty much. And I know something. Cool. And so I've been able to make some connections that way. That has been really, really fun and fulfilling. And it's, I think, I don't know, there's some parallel to talking about race and talking about mixedness and stuff. It's just like there's you get the door open and relationships start, and then you can really start a dialogue that can be really fruitful.
We've had some athletes on the show, but this is the most like using the sport to talk about race and diversity that I've had on here, which is really interesting. It does kind of make me want to pay a little bit more attention to that element of it. Because, unfortunately, well, let's say Japan, for instance, any mixed Japanese athlete will be famous because they're not Japanese, right? Of course. Whereas here in the States, they'll be looked at as Black Japanese Naomi Osaka, like that kind of thing. Like it'll always be a part of her story here. Right. Instead of her just being a really great tennis player, she is Haitian and Japanese and she's from Japan, but she's talking a lot about American politics and that's part of her story. Where in Japan, I think a bigger part of her story is that she's not Japanese enough. Which I think is a thing that we deal with also as mixed Japanese, which is why I think it's also really interesting that because you grew up hanging out in Chinatown, you got to be Asian versus being Japanese. And I'm only now dealing with Asian acceptance because I've been trying to be Japanese for so long. And Japanese tend to stick, if they're going to be around other Asians, they're going to be around other Japanese, but they're going to assimilate to the dominant culture. And so like, I find myself in a lot of positions where I'm around Japanese in a Japanese neighborhood, like where I live here in West LA. And yet everybody is American. We just stay with all of our restaurants in one neighborhood. Like that's the extent of what we do here when we leave Japan. Right. And so it's really interesting. Yeah. You're Asian.
Yeah, I was always just Asian.
So let's kind of use that to talk a little bit about the Asian hair thing. So.
Yes. Okay. I have a perfect story for this. Okay. Yeah. So, it's about my hair. So I had long hair, like I have like COVID hair right now. The listeners can't see the glory of this COVID hair.
But see it. If you're into Japanese like teen mags, like pop mags, Ty has full on like hot Japanese boy magazine hair.
Woo! Thank you. How flattering. Oh my goodness.
I don't know how else to describe it.
Right now it's kind of like a Timothy Chalamet flop.
It's got that
that's
flop
going
thing. On. But that would be super sticky in Japanese.
That is an honor for you to say. So when I was in high school, I had like the full like lion's mane anime hair, like Dragon Ball Z length hair.
Sure.
And so I had that like, freshman through junior year. And then the summer of junior year, before becoming a senior, I just decided like on the spur of the moment to just cut the whole fucking thing off. And I don't know why I did this. And I also don't know why the next thing I did was walk to Chinatown to get this done. I don't know the origin of this, but there was something in me that was like that wanted to be in an Asian barbershop.
Sure.
Or in an Asian place. So I did this. I went to, under the Manhattan Bridge and paid $5 for a haircut. And the lady who I could not communicate with, she like cut my hair. And I kept saying like, no, all the hair needs to go. And she was like, okay. And she like cut it like, 2 inches. And I was like, no, all the hair, like take it all off. And it took 3 tries to get her to get all the hair off. And I was left with just this it's kind of like a Chinese kid New York look.
That's what I'm picturing.
Of the like basically bald young Asian kid walking around in New York. And I felt like I was walking around Chinatown after that, and it was like I felt so good. I just felt so like it was like a combination of like accepted and excited about the future as a haircut can do to you.
It can,
you know, and
have a big impact.
I still remember like the feeling of it in my head, you know, feeling like that the freedom of this. And I think, and there's always been something about the hair, because Asian hair is different and hard for white people to cut.
It is. It's actually very similar to, I mean, it's not as similar in texture and technique to cut as black hair, but it's as cumbersome for a white person who's trained in white cosmetology schools.
Exactly.
Out.
So I've had a lot of trouble because you know what it was? Okay, I just figured this out because this is like therapy right now. Thank you very much, Charmaine. So like previous to that, I had always worn a hat because my hair was always like poking up. Like whenever I had short hair, it was always poking up.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I never liked it. So I always kind of wanted it to go down. So I was always wearing a hat. And I think that's what it was. I was like, I don't need to change anything. Like the way I am right now is exactly what I want.
Yeah.
You know?
Nice.
Wow. So I can't believe I figured that out. So
I'm going through a whole hair thing too.
Yes, I want to hear your story because you have black hair and Asian hair. And so what amazing challenges have you run into in your life?
My hair has changed a bunch throughout my life, and partly because my half Japanese, half white mom became a black hairstylist. So she only does black hair. But she always did my hair. Yeah. If my parents got to be what the other parent was, I would still be mixed the same way that I am. But my mom was very much part of black culture, even though she's Japanese and white. And my dad is a little bit teetering on the white side more than my mom was. So it's a whole thing. But yeah, so when I was younger, my hair, I was very Japanese when I was born. I looked Japanese. I had that tuft of long, like that one long tuft of hair where no other hair existed. I had that. I was rocking that for a long time. And then it finally grew out, and my mom decided when I was like a baby, like 1 or 2 years old, like, let's give it a perm because she's black. So it all fell out. And my texture has changed so many times because my mom has experimented on me thinking that my hair was as texture wise, like could take what black hair could take. Right. And so predominantly my hair has been bone straight. Predominantly my hair has been very Japanese, like 1A hair. Very, very fine, but a lot of it, it's heavy as hell. And that's been the thing. And then I started to get to be like 33, 34, and the lower part of my hair from like here down started to curl. And that didn't happen before. Like that took until my 30s. And it was so weird because it grows out of my hair Asian, but then it goes down to here and becomes black.
Your hair is mixed.
Yeah, my hair is mixed. I have a little afro. If I go to any place
that's incredible.
It's so weird. If I go to a place that has humidity, my top of my hair is flat to my head and the bottom puffs up like a half-row. So I have like an actual half-row. So as part of my hair journey, I'm thinking of myself as more of a mixed black kid in this case. I'm like, I'm going to shave my head. I'm going to go full on African woman warrior hair. I'm just going to shave it all off, and it's going to be part of my black ass story. I did not know that when I shaved my head, I was going to become an Asian boy. But in the same time that I'm getting Asian American acknowledgement or acceptance, both like in like meat space, but also like with the Asian American Podcasters Association that we met through, and people actually like telling me, you're one of us, like you're Asian too, just because you're mixed, it doesn't mean you're not Asian. I've never gotten that most of my life. I've always been told because I'm black dominated all of the other things. So I'm going through all this like emotions related to Asian and acceptance. And then my hair starts to grow out because I'm finally ready to like grow my hair out, and it spikes. It's inflexible. It won't style. It's just, and then someone goes, you know what? When I saw pictures of you before, I was like, oh yeah, that's a mixed black girl. And then she said, but then you shaved your head. And I'm like, oh, that's an Asian person. And I've been told I have the Asian boy haircut so many times since I've shaved my head, and I'm growing my hair back out right now, which is why it's going through what it's going through. And I'm just like, I didn't know that I had to shave my head. I didn't know that my black hair journey was going to turn into an Asian hair journey. I did not realize that was going to happen.
Funny, yeah.
So now I fully have Asian hair. There's no hint of black mixed hair at all. It's fully Asian. I'll let you know in like 6 months. If
okay. All right. Sounds good. I'll keep an eye on Insta.
I'll be like, there's Black again. Yeah.
So I wanted to tell you that, I listened to a bunch of your recent episodes talking about that and heard you talk about that in the award show. And I found that very powerful because I really hadn't heard much from mixed Black and Asian people about the challenges of that particular mix of identity. And that must have been very difficult. And what you said about like always feeling like you could fit in more easily in Black spaces, but that when it came to being Asian, it was more difficult. That's heartbreaking. So
yeah, I get not jealous. It's a wrong way. There's got to be a word for when you're sort of jealous of a person, but in a way that you're happy for them at the same time. I don't think envy counts.
The Germans have a word, I'm sure, for that. Yeah.
Maybe, probably. But like, I get jealous when I hear other mixed Asian be like, oh yeah, they totally let me be Asian. And I'm like, how? What did you do? Like, what is the thing? But also I'm so stoked for you that is the experience.
Well, the secret is whiteness. Because
that sucks. So.
I mean, it's just my take on it, but like my theory is that there's like a hierarchy of difference, and Blackness is the worst difference.
Yeah.
And so, me being mixed, white and Japanese, I get categorized into the lowest rung of difference, which is Japanese.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And that's the tragedy of it. But I think that, like what you said, it inspires me to remember to be, vocal with people who share that identity about their Asianness, and to encourage, and uplift them in that journey, because it's easy to kind of forget that other people might not feel comfortable or feel accepted, even if you do accept them, you might not even think about it.
Yeah.
So I'd appreciate you just being so honest about that, because I think it's something that we can all remember and do better at.
It's weird
in
to
the
have
Asian
a different
community
access than my own mother. Like my mother's biracial. She's Japanese and white, and so she could tell our Japanese family that she was Japanese and white. Like, and they knew my white grandfather and stuff like that. Until my grandparents got divorced. Like, that was a thing. But when I came around, it was don't tell the family that you're part Black. So I had to call my dad American, which meant nothing to me, but to them meant white. But they couldn't understand why we were so brown, so they thought we were Mexican. So
they couldn't put two and two together there, huh?
They're like, they're brown. I'm so confused. Yeah, they thought we were Mexican. So it's just weird to have this weird proximity to my Japaneseness, and that like my Japanese grandmother is where all of my Japaneseness comes from. Like I lived in her house, I ate her food, I speak kinda, like that kind of stuff. But then she's also the person who was my block to the rest of the family to be able to tell them what I was. Now that the cousins know, and we had to wait until my great grandparents died, but once my great grandparents died, we told everybody. We started to tell the cousins. So I'm sure by now it has made its way through to Hawaii and Japan and my family. I'm sure everybody knows now. But yeah, for the longest it was that big secret, and the only ones that are going to talk about it are the kids that were raised in America. The ones that
that's so tragic to hear, and I'm sorry. That's very difficult.
But I'm glad to get a chance to meet other mixed Japanese in particular. It's great to meet mixed people in general, but with mixed Japanese, it's that lack of needing to explain the context of like this thing that we feel about our Japaneseness is actually doing a lot, I think.
Yeah, good. Yeah, that's right. And I think likewise on my side, going through your show and really thinking through this has opened up a lot of things for me that have been new. And it's especially like in the COVID era, like, I don't interact with human beings very frequently. So I'm kind of forgetting about, really thinking about my identity, but it is very, very important and powerful in the way that we look at ourselves. And I think a healthy amount of introspection is important, but a healthy dialogue is also very important.
Right. Absolutely.
Because the way that race is treated in our national conversation is totally screwed up to me, and that it further others people who feel othered, because it makes you feel like discussing your race is in and of itself verboten,
right?
Like exactly. You mentioned with the great grandparents, and that's just that is a trauma to go through. So I was going to ask you, being a quarter Japanese, my kids are a quarter Japanese because I'm married to a white lady. So I am still figuring out. I'm not going to figure it out. They're going to figure out what their sort of, feelings of Japaneseness or Asianness are. And it's one funny thing is like in terms of phenotype, my daughter is much more white. So I think people wouldn't even suspect that she was Asian if she didn't have an Asian last name. Whereas my son looks a lot like me.
Okay.
So we kind of have like an Asian kid and a white
kid.
Have
different identities. Yeah. It's so wild.
Yeah.
I'm really into, even though I don't want kids myself, I'm really into parenting mixed kids right now. Like I'm into what we're supposed to do given like what I lacked. Like even though I have two biracial parents, they're from a generation that didn't talk about anything. So we didn't talk much about it. We talked about racism more than we talked about race or even our identity. So I'm really into like how people are dealing with their mixed kids and especially multi-generational mixes. I think access is the biggest thing. Letting them talk about it. If they get bullied, let them say it all, whatever. But then also like reminding them that they come from all of these cool things, like whatever your white culture is and whatever your partner's white culture is,
right.
If you have access to it, letting them know that thing is there and this is cool thing that you're a part of, but it's like from far away,
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Because that was something I will say one of my aunts did this. My mom's youngest sister basically kind of rescued me from my parents when I was 15. And after that, she would take me to museums or she would take me to all these different things. And so we went to a place that had something that was related to us in some way, shape or form. She would validate that this is from us. This thing is from us. We would go to, it turns out, we don't really have Irish blood in us, but we thought we did because of But we went to all the Irish festivals. Like we went to the German stuff, like all that kind of stuff. And even though she was the mixed Japanese side, she wanted us to have access to whiteness that wasn't American because of how toxic we felt our experience was where we were at. And we got to separate that from our grandfather because even though he wasn't around for us anymore, he had left. Like we got to say like, we're still of this thing. And I feel like because of that, I'm far more comfortable talking about ethnicity and culture and all that kind of stuff. But for other kids, people that are growing up, if they're feeling Japanese today, you are the most Japanese kid you can be. If they're feeling white today, all right, let's get into it. Like, what is it? Is it your look or is it how people treat you or is it more comfortable?
Right.
So I think really opening up those, it'll be really interesting watching them grow up with them having two different phenotypes because I have a friend, my co-host on Blurred Comics. He's also black, gray racial, but his kids are black, white, Mexican. One looks white, blonde hair. One looks black, curly black hair. The white one is super black. Like the one that looks white is super black. And the other one is still finding herself. And she's like more leaning into the whole mixedness. Like, she's more into the whole picture. So it'll be interesting to see like as you're validating whatever their thing is and even talking about what your thing is. Cause I think that was another thing. Absolutely. If my parents had talked about that, it might have been a little bit easier for me to figure out how to talk to them about my deals.
Right. Yeah. I think it's
compartmentalized.
Right. It's easy to develop shame or feelings of unwantedness around things that aren't discussed.
Yeah.
And things that aren't ever just mentioned as typical, so if you find out that you're gay and you've never had any sort of conversation about anything other than hetero, love and attraction, then you're going to feel, you're going to have an inner dialogue, right? About the commentary isn't going to go away. It's just uninformed.
Right. Yeah.
So
I think that'll be good for your kids if you let them see you thinking about it.
Right. Exactly.
Be more comfortable coming to you when it's tough, which I think is the most important thing is when it's tough. It's great if they come to you when it's awesome. like if they take like taiko drum classes or whatever, and then they're like, I'm, even though I look white, I'm like the dopest taiko drummer, but
right,
great when it's awesome.
Exactly. Yeah.
But when it's bad, if you're the person that they run to and on when they're having a bad mixed day and you let them feel it, I think like that's the thing I craved, and I didn't know I craved it until I was older. And I just caught myself saying, man, I wish my parents had ... And that's when I started to pay more attention to like, what is it like to parent mixed?
Growing up, I was very fortunate to have access to a lot of spaces that were very positive in terms of talking about race.
Yeah.
So I felt very blessed by that, and hope to give that to my kids. And one thing you mentioned that I think is really, really important that I'm trying to figure out is how to impart white ethnicity as something distinct and with specific detail, that you're not just
white is.
I barely know, I know the, okay. So I know that on my mother's side, mainly an Irish and Scottish mix. And I think my mother knows more than me, but I also believe that these aspects of history are very complicated. And I wouldn't be surprised if I had any kind of origin in my family tree. And I don't know, have you seen this show Finding Your Roots with Henry Louis Gates?
Yes.
It's fucking awesome.
It's amazing.
And I would love to, if the companies that analyzed your DNA didn't also sell your DNA to, third parties, I would totally do that, because I would really like to understand that a little bit better. And I feel like giving, white kids a healthy sense of white ethnicity is important in not continuing the narrative that race is something that non-white people have.
The reason why I ask if you know where it's from, because I think that is exactly what you're saying. If you can tell the story of the immigration story, even if it's not like your exact, ancestors, but just in general, if we come from, so on my mom's side, her whiteness is they've been here since before this was the United States. They've been here since the 1700s. So they are Welsh, Irish, or Welsh, Scottish, and English mixes, whatever, right? And then my dad's whiteness is straight up England, and England and Wales, like 100%. That's what they are. They are some British ass people. So I have two different kinds of stories. I have an old immigrant story that is coming here to escape something bad where they were at, and they were very poor, and that's how they got here. And then I have an immigrant story where like a black man from America went to England and married a white lady and brought her here. And so she has a very like, I'm hoity-toity kind of whiteness. She's the kind of white immigrant that says like immigrants should speak English. I speak English. Why don't they speak English? It's that.
Right.
So if you can tell your kids a story, if you can pinpoint roughly when they got here, you can kind of pinpoint the immigrant story that will help them realize that whatever their whiteness is not American itself. Like, and so they don't have to be like, this is my country. Any of you that are different from me. Don't belong.
Right. So
if you show
remembering the immigration,
the hardships from the white places they're from are the reason why they're here.
That's right.
Because look, like black folks, our transition onto this land is enslavement 400 years ago. White people were coming here 400 years ago too. There's no reason why we don't know why they came here. We know why the Africans were here. What were the white people doing? How'd they get here? So if you can if you put it in that same context of like the other immigrants that are coming through, everybody was coming here. The only people that didn't come here voluntarily for the most part was the Africans, but most of the white people came here voluntarily. And so that will help like demystify whiteness. That's
right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think it's all about just identifying that there is no normal, that, and so therefore we are all normal, and we don't need to feel like we have to fit into a particular box. And I think mixedness is a great a great vector to reckon with that, right. Because we don't fit a box, and it's special.
Yeah. So we're getting close to the end, and I like to ask all of my guests, what do you love most about being mixed?
So what I really love about being mixed is the opportunity to see different cultures firsthand, and to feel like, in my case, I feel lucky to have felt that I belong in both of my cultures growing up. And I feel like that's given me the ability to move easily throughout the world. And it feels kind of like a superpower, that I can go into Chinatown and be Asian, and then I can walk around the rest of New York City and just be another guy. Mm-hmm. And so I've always felt, as I mentioned, that mixedness is a source of abundance, not a source of limitation. Mm-hmm. And I've always felt that. So I think, I'll leave it at that. It's been a positive experience for me. And I remember, I recognize fully that it's not for many. Mm-hmm. And so I'm very grateful for that. And I hope that, through, having conversations like this and promoting the work that people like you are doing, that we can destigmatize and make life easier for people who have these experiences, because it shouldn't be that way. And everyone's mixed in some way. You go back far enough, so we all need to recognize the complexity of each other's identities and avoid, othering anyone because of because they don't fit that particular mold. Right.
Why don't you let everybody know how to find your show, your business?
Thank you. So my business is called Cantilever. We're at cantilever.co, and we make great websites. And my podcast is called We The Peeps, and we cover the U.S. men's national team, the women's national team, and other topics related to U.S. soccer. And we're at WTPpod.com. Thank
you again, Fujimura-san, for coming to the show. I really appreciate it. I also, I don't know if you realize this, but when we were on the award show and I had made mention of, my issues with Asian acceptance and feeling not Asian enough because I was mixed, you were actually the first responder to say, like, I'm mixed Japanese too. Like, so you stood out for me amongst the, I've been in contact with some of the other people that also commented, but I don't know if you realized that you were the first commenter.
I didn't realize that, but it goes to show the enthusiasm there is around this topic. Right. And good on you for promoting it. I think it's very important and great that people can listen to this and feel like, they're normal, which they are.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah, this was awesome.
Militantly Mixed is a ManeHustle media podcast, produced and hosted by me, Charmaine Fury. Music is by David Bogan the One. You can follow us on social media on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Militantly Mixed. If you'd like to become a sponsor of Militantly Mixed, please go to patreon.com/militantlymixed for monthly sponsorship, or paypal.me/militantlymixed for a one-time only donation. And if you like what you hear on Militantly Mixed, please subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget to be your mixed ass self. ManeHustle Media. Turn your side hustle into your main hustle.